There's something backwards about how we choose leaders. Think about it. The person who's absolutely certain they should be in charge, who fights tooth and nail for power, who can't imagine not ruling, we vote for them. Meanwhile, the person who's hesitant about leadership, who sees it as a burden rather than a prize, who has to be convinced to even run, we ignore them completely. And somehow, this pattern keeps ending in disaster. Let me show you just how dangerous this is. In 1971, Philip Zimbardo took 24 ordinary college students and randomly assigned them roles as prisoners and guards in a fake prison at Stanford University. The experiment had to be shut down after just 6 days. The reason? The guards had become so sadistic and the prisoners so psychologically damaged that continuing became dangerous. These weren't bad people. They weren't selected for cruelty or weakness. They were normal students who simply got a taste of power in a controlled environment. Here's what that tells us. If regular people can turn cruel with just a hint of authority in a basement at Stanford, what happens when actual power is on the line? When the stakes are billions of dollars, nuclear weapons, and millions of lives? 2,400 years ago, a philosopher named Plato watched Athens, the birthplace of democracy, tear itself apart. He saw this exact pattern play out in real time, and he figured out why it keeps happening. What he discovered would disqualify almost every modern leader you can think of. But to understand his answer, we need to understand the disaster that taught him everything. Plato wasn't some dreamy academic disconnected from reality. He lived through chaos that would break most people. He watched Athens execute his teacher, Socrates, simply for asking uncomfortable questions. He saw leaders lie their way into power, manipulate crowds with empty promises, and send young men to die in wars that served nothing but their own ambition. He witnessed demagogues rise to power by telling people exactly what they wanted to hear rather than what they needed to know. But he didn't just observe this pattern from a distance. He knew the prototype personally. Alcibiades was everything a society could want in a leader on paper. He was brilliant, charismatic, and educated by Socrates himself. He was devastatingly handsome, a proven military genius, and driven by an ambition that would make modern politicians look humble by comparison. But that ambition had no loyalty behind it. When Athens didn't worship him enough, he betrayed them to their mortal enemy, Sparta. When Sparta grew suspicious of his motives, he switched sides again to Persia. When that alliance fell apart, he tried to manipulate his way back to Athens. His brilliance was undeniable, his talent was extraordinary, and his legacy was disaster for everyone who trusted him. Plato watched this man, this perfect storm of talent and ambition, leave a trail of bodies and broken cities in his wake. And he realized something that changed how he viewed power forever. The qualities that make someone successful at gaining power are often the exact opposite of the qualities that make them good at wielding it responsibly. This realization led him to write The Republic, where he laid out an idea so radical it still makes modern politicians deeply uncomfortable. Plato's central claim was devastatingly simple. The people most qualified to rule are those who would do so reluctantly, seeing leadership as a burden rather than a prize to be won. Let that sink in for a moment. We live in a world where people spend billions of dollars campaigning for positions of power. They shake every hand, kiss every baby, make promises they know they can't keep, and smile until their faces ache. Our entire political system rewards people who crave authority above all else. We've built a massive filtering mechanism that selects for exactly one trait: the desperate hunger for power. This is the exact inverse of what Plato said a functional system should look like. According to him, the moment someone desperately wants power, they've revealed something fundamentally dangerous about their psychology. The desire itself is the disqualification. But why? What's so dangerous about ambition? To understand Plato's reasoning, you need to know how he viewed the human soul. He divided it into 3 parts. First, there's appetite, our craving for pleasure, wealth, status, and physical gratification. Think of this as your desire for immediate satisfaction and comfort. Second, there's spirit, our hunger for victory, honor, recognition, and dominance over others. This is your competitive drive, your ego, your need to win and be celebrated. And third, there's reason. Our capacity to grasp truth, wisdom, and genuine justice. This is your ability to think long-term, see the bigger picture, and pursue what's actually right, rather than what just feels good. Every human being has all three of these elements, but in most people, appetite and spirit run the show. We want more. We want to win. We want to be recognized and celebrated. And there's nothing inherently wrong with these drives. They're just human nature. The problem emerges when you give power to people who are ruled primarily by appetite and spirit, because power becomes a tool for feeding those drives rather than serving truth or justice. Consider how we actually select leaders today. We choose based on confidence, charisma, speaking ability, fundraising capacity, and family connections. These are all surface qualities that help someone win campaigns. Plato asked completely different questions. Does this person genuinely understand what justice is? Can they distinguish between appearance and reality? Have they spent years training their mind to see past their own biases and desires? Can they put truth above popularity? And most importantly, would they rule reluctantly rather than eagerly? By those standards, how many current leaders would actually qualify? The answer should genuinely disturb you because it's close to zero. But before we get to Plato's solution, we need to understand just how deep this problem actually goes, because it's not just a moral failing. It's built into how humans process power itself. Plato had a famous allegory that explains everything. Imagine prisoners chained in a cave since birth, facing a wall. Behind them, a fire casts shadows on that wall. The shadows are all they've ever known, so they think the shadows are reality. They've built entire lives around being experts at interpreting those shadows. Then one prisoner escapes. He sees the fire, the objects casting shadows, and eventually stumbles outside to see the sun itself, the ultimate source of light and truth. He returns to free the others, but here's the devastating part. They don't believe him. He can't even see the shadows properly anymore, so obviously something has damaged him. Some want to kill him for challenging the comfortable knowledge they've spent their lives building. This isn't just an ancient allegory. It's a blueprint for how power works today. The people who seek political leadership aren't trying to lead you out of the cave into the light. They're competing to control which shadows you see. They don't show you reality because reality is complicated and disappointing. Instead, they cast shadows that make you feel good, that confirm what you already believe, that make you angry at the right enemies, that make you feel intelligent for agreeing with them. They don't need truth on their side. They just need to tell you what you want to hear. And what Plato couldn't have known, what makes his cave allegory even more accurate than he could have imagined, is that modern neuroscience has proven power literally changes how leaders perceive reality. Dacher Keltner's research at Berkeley has documented something disturbing. As people gain power, they literally lose the ability to empathize with others. Their brains start processing emotions differently. They become more impulsive, take more risks, and stop seeing things from other perspectives. Power doesn't just corrupt character, it rewires neural pathways. The more power someone has, the harder it becomes to relate to those without it. They stop seeing people as people and start seeing them as abstractions, numbers on a spreadsheet, votes to be won, crowds to be managed. Think about what this means. The people most attracted to power are already driven by appetite and spirit rather than reason. They're already comfortable manipulating others. That's how they climb the ladder. Then they gain power, and it degrades their empathy even further. Someone skilled at casting shadows becomes even better at it, even more disconnected from reality, and even more certain their manipulations are justified. There's another layer to this. The Dunning-Kruger Effect shows that people with limited knowledge massively overestimate their competence, while experts underestimate theirs. Incompetent people don't know enough to realize they're incompetent, so they're the most confident, the most certain, the most likely to take charge. Meanwhile, people with genuine expertise are cautious because they're aware of complexity, edge cases, and how much they still don't know. They hesitate to make bold claims because they understand how easily they could be wrong. So guess who rises faster in any leadership hierarchy? The confident fool or the cautious expert? You already know the answer because you see it play out every single day. The system filters out exactly the people it needs most and elevates exactly the people it should fear. Someone can go from reality television or narrow business success straight to the highest political offices with zero preparation for actual governance, no training in philosophy, no deep study of ethics or justice, no examination of their own biases and limitations, just confidence, charisma, and an insatiable hunger for power. Now you understand the full scope of the problem. It's not just that we choose the wrong leaders. The system rewards confidence over competence. Power itself corrupts their empathy and judgment, and the whole cycle perpetuates because most people prefer comfortable shadows to uncomfortable truth. So what's the solution? After seeing how deep this problem goes, you can understand why Plato's answer had to be so radical. This is why Plato proposed something that sounds almost impossible. Philosopher-kings. Not politicians who happen to enjoy reading philosophy. Not leaders who took a few ethics courses. Philosophers who would be forced to govern against their own wishes after decades of preparation. The training regimen Plato envisioned was extraordinary. From ages 20 to 35, these individuals would study mathematics, dialectic, the art of logical reasoning through questioning and debate, and abstract philosophy. Their goal? To understand what Plato called the forms, eternal, perfect templates that exist beyond our changing, imperfect world. Think of it this way. You've seen many just actions in your life, but Plato believed behind all those imperfect, earthly attempts at justice exists the form of justice itself, a perfect, unchanging standard that all earthly justice imperfectly copies. The same applies to beauty, truth, courage, and ultimately, the good itself. These forms are like the fire in the cave, the real source of light that creates the shadows we mistake for reality. From 35 to 50, these trained philosophers would serve in military and civic roles, applying their philosophical training to real-world problems. Only then, at age 50 and beyond, would they reluctantly take turns governing the city. Why this intense, decades-long preparation? Because Plato believed you cannot rule justly unless you understand what justice itself actually is, not just opinions about what seems fair, but the eternal form of justice. The philosopher-king had to transcend the world of appearances entirely, grasp the form of the good, the ultimate source of all truth and value, and only then return to govern with that knowledge. This training was designed to solve every problem we just discussed. Decades of philosophical study would ensure they're ruled by reason, not appetite or spirit. Understanding the forms would make them immune to shadow casting because they'd seen the light itself. Their reluctance would prove they weren't seeking power to feed their ego, and their wisdom would give them the competence that confident fools lack. In Plato's vision, these philosopher-kings would be the prisoners who escaped the cave, saw the sun, and returned. Not to manipulate the others, but to genuinely free them. They would understand reality itself and govern according to truth and justice, not opinion and manipulation. History has given us perhaps one example that came close. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who wrote Meditations, was trained as a Stoic philosopher before inheriting power. He saw rule as a burden, constantly reminding himself in his writings that duty mattered more than desire, that reason must triumph over appetite and spirit. But even he fell short of Plato's ideal. He inherited power through family rather than being selected for wisdom. And despite all his philosophical training, his choice of successor led to tyranny under his son Commodus, one of Rome's worst emperors. If even the closest historical example couldn't meet the standard, perhaps that's why Plato himself admitted his ideal city would need to begin with what he called a noble lie, a founding myth to make people accept the system. Maybe he knew, deep down, that his vision was impossible in practice. The question of who would educate these philosophers, who would guard the guardians, was one even he couldn't fully resolve. But here's what matters. His diagnosis about power seekers was devastatingly accurate, and we're still proving him right every single day. So if philosopher-kings were impossible, What did we actually choose? Democracy. But you need to understand what democracy actually is, and, on rare occasions, what it has managed to achieve. Before we examine democracy's flaws, consider its few shining moments. These are the times when genuinely reluctant leaders emerged. Not philosopher-kings, but flawed humans who understood that power should be viewed as a temporary burden, not a permanent prize. Cincinnatus was a Roman farmer. Twice, Rome faced existential crises. Twice, they gave him absolute dictatorial power. And twice, he won the war, voluntarily handed back power, and returned to farming. He didn't commission statues or write memoirs. He went back to plowing fields because power was a burden he was relieved to put down. Centuries later, George Washington could have been king after winning the Revolutionary War. The army would have followed him. Officers literally proposed making him monarch. Instead, he chose limited power under a constitution. More importantly, he walked away after 2 terms, not because law forced him, but because he understood that holding power corrupts even the best intentions. His voluntary departure set a precedent that would shape American democracy for generations. These weren't philosopher-kings trained for decades in understanding the forms. They were imperfect people who simply grasped what Plato was trying to teach, that the hunger for power is itself the warning sign and reluctance is the qualification. Now compare that to today's reality. How many current political leaders would voluntarily give up power if they had the choice? How many genuinely see their position as a temporary duty to be fulfilled rather than a permanent right to be defended? How many would walk away from office if they could legally keep ruling? The silence answers the question. So what is democracy really designed to do? It was never created to select the best leaders. It's a compromise built by people who understood that no perfect system exists. Democracy is designed to prevent the worst outcomes rather than guarantee the best ones, a mechanism for managing conflict without violence, removing dangerous leaders before they become tyrants, and distributing power so no one person can destroy everything. The chaos, the messy compromises, the mediocre leaders, that's not democracy failing. That's democracy working as intended. It's a controlled burn to prevent the forest fire of tyranny. Democracy accepts that leaders will be flawed because the alternative, unaccountable rulers claiming superior wisdom, has been catastrophic every time it's been tried. But we've betrayed that wisdom. We've taken democracy's acceptance of imperfection and weaponized it into a celebration of ignorance. We don't just tolerate leaders driven by appetite and spirit, we celebrate them as authentic and relatable. We've confused the idea that everyone should have a voice with the notion that expertise and knowledge don't matter. Democracy was supposed to dilute and distribute power. Instead, we've concentrated it in the hands of those who can afford billion-dollar campaigns. It was supposed to enable accountability. Instead, we've made leaders untouchable through partisan loyalty and media manipulation. It was supposed to prevent tyrants. Instead, we've started electing them because their shadow-casting techniques evolved faster than our ability to detect the manipulation. The people best suited for leadership are often the ones who have to be convinced to take the role. They understand the weight, recognize their limitations, care more about truth than victory. But they're too busy solving real problems to play the game required to win elections, so they stay in laboratories, hospitals, and classrooms while the power-hungry rise to the top. The system filters out exactly the people it needs most. Plato understood something we keep trying to forget. The shadows are comfortable. Reality is harsh. The light hurts when you've been in darkness your whole life. Most people prefer familiar illusions to uncomfortable truth. Political leaders know this. The good ones feel burdened by it. The dangerous ones exploit it. And us? We're complicit. We vote for shadowcasters because their shadows make us feel good. We reward confidence over competence because confidence is entertaining. We celebrate ambition when we should recognize it as the warning sign Plato identified. Every time you see a leader making sweeping promises, ask yourself, are they showing me reality or manipulating shadows? When someone pursues power with desperate intensity, question what that hunger reveals about them. When you hear absolute certainty about complex issues, Remember that genuine knowledge makes people cautious, not confident. The question you can't avoid is this. If you had to choose between a leader who makes you feel good and a leader who tells you hard truths, which would you actually pick? Not which one you'd say you'd pick in conversation. Which one would you vote for when you're alone in that booth and nobody's watching? Your answer reveals whether you're still chained in the cave watching shadows, or willing to turn around and face the painful light. Because Plato won't let us escape this brutal truth. We get the leaders we deserve, not the ones we claim to want, the ones we actually choose. If we keep choosing leaders driven by appetite and spirit, if we keep rewarding hunger for power instead of recognizing it as disqualification, we're proving Plato right about everything. We're proving the cave stays dark, not because of the shadow casters, but because we keep looking at the wall. The question isn't whether Plato would let today's leaders rule. Obviously, he wouldn't. The question is whether you're going to keep voting for them anyway. The people casting shadows aren't the only ones responsible for the darkness. The people watching those shadows and calling them reality bear responsibility too. Which one are you? If this changed how you see leadership even slightly, share it with someone who needs to see through the shadows. And if you want more philosophy that makes you uncomfortable instead of making you feel smart, subscribe. Until next time, remember, the cave only stays dark because we keep looking at the wall.